And we are live. Welcome back to the Weekly Roundup. Miss Terry Fry is going to kick us off today. Lots of discussion around staff meetings, staff, what to do, motivating staff. Jennifer made a point just off camera here, which we'll jump back to in a second. Things have changed pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and then now sort of what's actually happening is different again. So there's like a recalibration. That's recalibration opportunity, let's say, but let's jump right in. Terry, go for it.
Well, good morning, everybody. So one of the things I wanted to talk about this morning, there was a really very great thread in the YC last week into this week, and it's a perennial problem, is how to get your staff, your teachers to come to staff meetings. And how often should you have staff meetings? And should you compensate? Well, absolutely. I'm going to say straight up, flat out, yes, you should compensate your teachers for coming to a staff meeting. Anytime you're doing anything mandatory, you got to pay them. In fact, by law in this country, you do. And buying them lunch is not paying them. I'm just saying. So I know, oh, I buy them lunch. Just saying that's really not, really copacetic. So first off, you got to pay them. And then what's interesting, and then some of my conversations with my clients this week, I'm sensing this thing of, and we know this is particularly true in the yoga world, is that it's like, oh, well, it's not their full-time job. It's their stay-at-home moms, or they're retired, or whatever the reason is. It's like somehow thinking that because of that, they're of less, I can't do anything about that. And I'm like, because of that, I'm sorry, I'm doing multiple things at once. Josh, I don't know how you do this and talk at the same time. I'm posting the link and doing multiple. I got to get better at that. Anyway, so now I'm back, I can focus more. And so with that mindset of, well, it's not their main income, or they really don't need the money because their partner is the primary breadwinner, or they're a stay-at-home mom. And it's like that's almost like a mindset of, they're doing me a favor by teaching my yoga class. And I get that sense sometimes from people. And in fact, one of my calls yesterday with one of my newer clients who's new owning a studio, we were talking about some of this stuff. And I just looked at her, I said, you are the owner. You get to dictate what you want your teachers to do. You get to dictate how you'd like them to teach the class, how low. That is what you get to do. And all of a sudden it was like, cha-ching, a light. I literally could see that. Oh my gosh, you're right. So I just like to kind of step back and challenge some of you that are coming from that position of fear. If I come in, and I do know, and I know Jen's going to talk a little bit about this with coming out of the post-pandemic, there's that position of fear where if I do too many things, they're going to quit. Well, maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because if you approach it from, this is my business, these are their responsibilities that I expect, these are my expectation, which goes back to establishing those expectations when you're even hiring them, or reestablishing them if you don't have them, and making it, this is a business. We are in the service business. We are in the business of bringing people to yoga and helping them create a habitual yoga practice. And I need you to, and if you're not going to take this seriously, then you're not really a good fit for us. Right? It doesn't matter what circumstances brought you to teach. It's like, this is what I expect from you. So that's just sort of something I'm just challenging people on, is to shift that mindset and come from that yogapreneur, from a business-centric mindset, still having the yoga brain and the business brain working together. And at the same time, conveying that from a position of strength and confidence that this is what I expect. Josh.
So many things about this. This is a really common symptom. So first off, let me just double down on what Terry said, that like, you're not alone if you're experiencing this, or if what Terry's example, if you're like, oh shit, I've said that, like, this is no shade. No one's judging. This is like a real thing. This is one of the quark categories of running yoga business that I find fascinating. And when I talk with other entrepreneurial friends in not yoga businesses and explain this stuff to them, they are fucking baffled. They're like, what? Like, they don't understand staff management in the yoga world at all. It is so outside of the normal reality for other businesses. So that it is just like a unique thing. So with that all being said, the first thing that came to mind is this is when we say you're not their friend. It doesn't mean that you don't have to be friendly or that you can't ever be someone's friend that you work with. You have to like break up with them or something like that as a friendship. But the not your friend concept, follow it through to the simplest thought. If I am not friends with Carol and I do not know about her personal life, and I do not know how much money her husband makes, and I do not know whether she needs the money, like, then none of that affects my decision-making on how to make my business strong. And I approach Carol with neutrality, and I just try to motivate her, the person, and help her succeed because we're on the same team. So this is one of those things that it falls a little bit into the category of like, if I don't have any money in the bank, and then I project the fact that $1,000 or a $1,500 a year annual pass, I think is a lot of money onto the person that I'm speaking to. That's a form of discrimination. I'm projecting my thought and feeling onto the person in front of me. Similarly with your staff, because you know something about them, and then that is the filter at which you are viewing them from, you are not treating them with neutrality. That's a type of discrimination against just helping them succeed at their job. And unfortunately, in this instance, it more often than not plays out into the studio and the students getting the short end of the stick. But in the end, it's something that you have to be responsible for fixing. So it's a tough one. So the first major thought, I've got more, but I'll keep it there for right now, is like, you're not their friend, and the knowledge that you have about them isn't good or bad, but it can't become something that affects how you treat someone. The fact that they do or don't need the money is completely irrelevant. What does that have to do with anything in terms of the job itself?
I'll go.
I would also chime in.
And we're done. So have a great weekend.
And to Josh's point about the money, this is another kind of in the same line, is in particularly, I'm not speaking for other cultures, but in the culture of the United States, when you say they don't need the money and you're projecting that, but however, particularly in the US, our society is tied to, our value is placed upon how much we make in the workplace. So even though I might have a partner who is the primary and supports our lifestyle, and I'm teaching yoga because I like to do it, I still am going to create my worth based upon what you're paying me. So if you feel that because of what Josh says, that I have a partner that, we live, whatever the circumstances are, you might be, oh, well, I can pay Terry less because she doesn't need the money. What kind of message is that sending to that teacher?
You also don't know, you
Right.
don't know what you don't know. So you may think they don't need the money, and they might actually really need the money, but not be coming to you asking for more just because they need it. So you really, I guess I'm tripling down on, that's not a good reason to justify your pay. And this, we've talked about this topic before about the idea of having a tiered performance-based pay scale. And this just, again, anytime you have these questions about how should I pay them? Is it fair? That is a really, really helpful tool, because you then create that proactively. You have a plan, and then you have a documented list of your expectations that you can always go back to and refer. Okay, well, am I being fair with my pay? Are they doing these things? They should be paid this much. It makes it so simple for you and so simple for them as well. So whatever that scale looks like. Yeah, go ahead, Vicky.
That takes it over to something I have been thinking about, which is related to performance-based pay. So what you were talking about there, I think, is a system of performance-based pay where you have kind of some levels, some tiers, and you have to sort of live up to expectations at every tier to get paid towards that tier. So you have to, like, to be a senior mentoring teacher, you've got to be able to mentor people, and you've got to do all the other things like sell memberships and have great retention and, you know, everything that you want. So there is that system. There's also the system of getting paid per head, which is quite common in yoga studios. And we recently had some discussions among the coaches, because Alex had a system that was a little bit pay per head, but more sophisticated in my understanding. I don't know if he's posted it in the network yet. No, maybe not. But yeah, so there's these two.
I can explain it. I can explain it in a second, but
yeah,
we're like dialing it in a little bit.
But it's a form of pay per head as I understand it, but more sophisticated. But it's still a pay per head, so you do get more in the busier class. So this kind of creates something like, there's also different ways of scheduling teachers. So there is the system where a teacher has their weekly class or classes. They always teach a certain class at a certain time every week. Then you have in the hot yoga world where it's kind of common to mix things up. I mean, it used to be that Bikram yoga, all your classes were Bikram yoga, you know, morning till evening. So it didn't matter. And then you just like mix up the teachers a little bit, so it wouldn't maybe get boring for the students. So then when we have either of those systems, like, who are you going to put on the class that has less people, right? Because students will choose by convenience. It's going to be that they can only make it lunchtimes, or they can only come after work. They can never do the lunchtimes, or like early morning, that's their time. They're going to pick a little bit based on that, but also based on the teacher. Yes, both. Still 6 a.m.'s usually less busy, usually. So who are you going to put on that? You're going to put your like top teacher. They're going to want top pay, but that's going to have less people. So then they get less pay. How do you solve that? Maybe Josh, you understand Alex's system better, and you can answer this.
Yeah, I'll let Teresa and Carol pipe in a little bit in a second too. Alex's pay structure is interesting because what he's done, and we've done different versions of this, his is just better. It's just really good. So he and I are dialing it up, and I'm sure he'll be presenting something to YC soon on this. But he's come up with a way to calculate based on your expenses and trying to get your teacher payroll to a specific expense percentage. What is the range that you can pay for a class? But it's not a specific number. It's not like it's $50. It's a range from X to Y based on the performance of the class. And from that, you can then design a pay structure that says, like, this is the minimum I pay for every class always. But when it hits these numbers, would be one of the metrics, then it goes up. But then there's also a cap, so you don't accidentally overpay. Because we do see that too, actually, in the hot yoga flow world. For some reason, specifically hot yoga flow, it's not uncommon for us to encounter, especially in the cities, teachers who are getting paid so much. They don't have a cap, and they're getting paid so much for the class that it's killing the margin of the business, because that overage, that's where like the profit margin sits for the studio, but they're eating all of it up. Like we had one teacher was getting paid at a studio I was working with recently, $240 for their busiest classes. So they were happy as shit. I'm not knocking on that. The problem was the business was making no money on that class. It was better for them to have a class that was half full with a less experienced teacher than to have that class totally full with a reservation list with this experienced teacher. Like, that dynamic's not correct. So we had to figure out how to adjust that a little bit.
I wanted to, I also, Teresa, Carol, jump in if you have anything to say before I go, because Josh had mentioned he was going to spin it over to you. Carol, how did you guys pay your teachers?
So this is really interesting because I started out as that traditional Bikram hot yoga studio, same class every time, really mixed up the teachers. It was random every week. And then as time went on, we're kind of more like, we got what we called like a footprint every 2 weeks. So doing like, so people could sort of schedule their lives, and we added different styles and all that stuff. And to me, this performance-based per head, I find it really interesting. Like, I don't think we could have done that when it was so random all over the place. Because the idea is that I think you need to have somewhat of the teacher needs to have that opportunity to build up the momentum with the same class, right? So like for me, I'm teaching now every other week, and I feel like I can build that up, but it would be even better, like Terry, like Tuesdays with Terry was doing, like if you could have something that was really the teacher's responsibility to get that that class built up over time. And that's where the performance per head would make more sense to me. So yes, I agree. Everything you need to have those tiers and in place, but how you pay, whether it's a base rate or base per head, I think is going to be determined on how you schedule your teachers.
Yeah, so that's one of the things I wanted to bring up. It's a good point, Carol, that like the tiered system that can work along with paying per head, or it can work when you're paying hourly, or it can work when you're paying a flat rate per class. That's just the pay logistics, right? So you can still have tiers that are based on whatever metrics you want. A lot of studios that like that type of tiered pay, you're basically just using attendance as the only metric that you're deciding to pay by, if that's all you have. I wanted to bring up a couple of ideas about this. Like one thing that you could do, which actually when I first started teaching, there was a studio that paid a flat rate, but the 6 a.m. classes, they paid just a bonus $5 more. No matter what your regular teaching rate, you always got $5 more if you taught a 6 a.m. because they wanted to incentivize teachers to teach that class. And I would actually say, like, here's the thing, if you're paying per head, and your 6 a.m. classes, for example, are like lower attendance, but they might be your biggest spenders. So you might have that class for a really good reason, and it might actually be like helping you with your retention of really quality brand ambassadors and stuff like that, even if the number of bodies in the room is lower. So it may make sense to actually, whether you're paying flat rate, hourly, or per head, to pay more for that class so that your teachers are incentivized to teach that class. And the other thing is, like, you could pay more per head. So that's how you would work with a tiered pay scale, is like at tier 2, they get paid more per head per class than tier 1. And so there's many ways to kind of customize the different approaches to your studio. The other thing I just wanted to add is like this idea of teachers building their classes. Ultimately, it's the owner's role in the business to bring people into the studio. It's the teacher's role to make sure they come back. So it depends on, like, are they bringing it? Is it new students that you're deciding that they're paid more because they're bringing in more new students, or are you paying them based on them fulfilling that role of getting the students to come back? So total bodies doesn't really tell you, are they new or are they actually retaining people? Because if there are 15 new students in the class because you paid for a bunch of marketing and advertising and are being really good at your role, then why should the teacher get paid more for them, really? But if there are 15 students who are coming back for their second class because the teacher did an awesome job at their role, that totally makes sense. So this is the case for using some kind of retention metric as a basis for paying your teachers more or less.
So a couple thoughts real quick on that. One is, we always tracked individual teacher retention very diligently. Even when it was required, we had someone paid to manually go through class by class for each teacher for a whole quarter and write down exactly what, like, their first visit retention people returning to their class, people returning to another class, the average number of days after taking their class before they went, how many people were they the last teacher that was the class they took before they, like, churned and canceled a membership or something. And don't know that I would recommend doing that all the time because it's a lot of labor, and there are no software, in case you're asking, there are no software systems that give you the information I just said. The best one out there, hands down, no question, is Walla. It gives you the most information by far. Nothing's even close to it, but it's not even as much as I'm talking about. There's still more to be desired. Everything I just said, you can get out of MindBody and out of Mariana Tech for sure. Other ones I don't know, but you have to export and manipulate and do all sorts of fancy shit to find it. I digress. The point is, we tried for a quarter to incentivize, because we had 2 or 3 new teachers at the same time. And we thought, okay, we want them to really participate in our continuing education program. And one of them in particular, she wasn't really progressing, in my opinion, mentoring her. Her class was stagnant. It was the same class every time. Even when we changed the class type she was teaching, no matter what feedback we gave her, and like for like months and months. So she was one of the reasons why we were like, okay, we're going to implement performance-based pay, and it's going to be based off of retention rate, because that what made more sense. And we had a different philosophy of approach for how we scheduled teachers for classes. So they weren't like building a certain time. And the punch in the face was she had the highest retention rate, even over me, for the next 6 months, teaching the same class every time. Like, it just blew me out of the water. So it definitely helped me swallow my ego and be like, well, I guess my opinion on you're a great teacher or not is slightly irrelevant, because people like this class and they're coming back to it. They wanted her for what she was offering. So after that, I was like, I just teach your class. I don't know what to say. But that silly anecdote aside, 2 things. I think that part of how you pay also, you've got to look at, like, if you zoom out as the owner, what is the yoga experience that you're offering? Because how you schedule your classes, how you schedule your teachers, and how you pay them become functions of how you control that. So if you guys will remember back in the day, in almost all, actually, to my knowledge, almost all of the, like, I hate this word, but like traditional yoga practices circa 2005 to 2010. So like Jivamukti, Ashtanga, Bikram for sure was the most extreme. Even Yin, like Paul Grilly Yin back in the day when it was just starting, when Bernie Clark was just starting, you didn't know who was teaching the class. They wouldn't advertise the teacher's name even. They would keep it secret. And then it was like kind of a big deal that you started to know the teacher's name. And then it was very uncommon to have the same teacher teach the same time slot in a studio that had multiple class times per day. If you wanted to get the one single solo teacher, you went to that teacher who just did like the Mysore practice at 6 a.m. every day. And that's the only class they ever taught, sort of thing. But that was part of the philosophy of approach towards the yoga experience that was being offered at that time. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just suggesting zoom out and like ask yourself the question, what's the experience you're trying to offer? Do we want it to feel like you have teachers that you really love and you're going to follow them a little bit, and we want to actually amplify that a little bit? That's not a bad thing. Or is it that we want it to feel like you just come to yoga and it has nothing to do with who's teaching, or some balance of the two? So there's some element of that. And to that point, here's the one thing that I can say it pretty strongly, because in my personal experience over the last decade plus across hundreds of studios, when I look at what the most successful studios, success being like they're making profit, they're paying themselves well, they're expanding, they're growing, they have huge impact, their clients are practicing a lot. If I look at what's happening with their teaching staff around promotion, the fundamental difference is their staff tend to not promote their class, and instead they promote habitual yoga practice. So when we talk about like it's the teacher's job to convince someone to want to come back, the paradigm shift that I would push for in any studio is that a teacher does want to ask students to come back. It's okay for them to say, come to my class on Tuesday. There's nothing wrong with that. But it has to be part of the bigger picture of like the real goal is just get these people back in to do more yoga, even if it's not my class, not my style, even if they never take my class again, they don't like my class. It's a pretty strong shift in terms of how teachers interact and message. Yeah, That's what I was going to say. Last little detail is because Kate brought up 6 a.m.s. We could do a whole roundup just on how to get your 6 a.m. class going. Our 6 a.m. class averaged 30 people a class. Kay's 5:30 in the morning class when I was there, averaged 20 or something like that or more. Like, those classes are not low performing classes eventually. You just have to build them up. But to Kay's point, one of my first business mentors in the yoga world said, you have to have, that was her philosophy, you have to have 6 a.m.s on the schedule because that's what sells your annual pass. Because even the people who don't go to it think, I could go at 6 a.m. So practically speaking now, it's not saying you have to have a 6 a.m. I don't actually think that's exactly correct. But you have to judge the success of certain time slots by a different metric. Therefore, you have to also judge the success of the teacher of the time slot and how you pay them by a different metric in some cases. The 6 a.m. might be one of those things. If you're running a 6 a.m., it is profitable. It's your brand evangelists that are in there. But, oh yeah, Vicky has her yoga class. It is profitable. It's your brand evangelists that are in there, but it never averages more than 12. Maybe that's okay because it might always have 12, like as long as it's never at 4 sort of thing. So you have to sort of, even if your room could fit 30. So you've got to kind of maybe look at that zoomed in a little bit more to that specific time. All right, that's it. That's what I got for now.
I was going to chime in a little bit with a couple thoughts going back to along the lines of what Kay said, where it's the studio's responsibility to get them in and then the teacher's responsibility to keep them. Playing devil's advocate a little bit, I'm always more of a fan of flat rate because, and that's just my opinion, I have clients that have pay per head and I help them set it up. I agree it has to be capped. There's a minimum, so on and so forth. But a lot of yoga studio owners will not follow the principle that we just talked about, like it's the yoga studio owner's responsibility to get them in. And they just say, well, I'll do a tiered pay scale. And then it's the teacher's responsibility to fill their classes. And then I don't have to fill their classes for them. And then what happens in those cases most of the time is they just get frustrated with the teachers because they're not filling their classes. And then the teachers get frustrated because they're not getting paid as much as they could if they could fill their classes more. The other side to that is something that we kind of talked about earlier today too, is that it depends a little bit on the demographics of the individual studio, but there will always be time slots that may not do as well. And there was a thread in the YC about this earlier this week where someone had posted asking, hey, are Monday nights usually popular in your studios? They seem to be in mine, something like that. And I know in my studio, Monday nights were by far the best attended classes of the week. I think people wanted to get their yoga in earlier in the week so they wouldn't get too busy and then not have time for it or something like that. Wednesday nights, crickets all the time. Over the years, we tried different instructors, different class types. It was just a slower night. So, if you have a tiered pay scale, Wednesday night's going to get screwed every time. No matter if the teacher is the best teacher ever, it just never would work. And so I think that it's an individual decision with individual studios on whether you want to go with that type of pay scale or not. But, it can be influenced by the time slot and people's availability and their schedules and things like that, as opposed to just this teacher is great, so they get big numbers, so they're going to get more pay. It doesn't always work out that way.
And I would agree, and also, challenge a few of these notions too. Any of these pay scales work if you onboard your teacher with that pay scale and you explain to your teacher how the pay scale works and the reasoning behind the pay scale. Now, most people that are watching this now, the question is, they're listening to all this. They're like, okay, that's great. That's great. Like, fine, maybe I need to change my pay scale, but I have two challenges and I'm living this right now as a studio owner. One, after the pandemic, when we were just getting open back, we plugged in holes of teachers anywhere that they could teach. Everybody's schedules and availabilities were different coming out of the pandemic, childcare, change of jobs, they moved, all of that kind of stuff. So many people are now working with a schedule with their teachers where they didn't say, oh, I'm placing you here, I'm placing you there. Like that just does not happen. It's, can I find somebody from my staff, my current staff, who can teach in this noon class? And they were put in those places because the pickings were slim and you were a little bit panicked to open things back up. And now people are starting to say, okay, now our feet are back underneath us. It's almost like scheduling, and I'm working on with this with some of my clients, is a grand reopening. And maybe that is the opportunity when, you know, you hear all of these great ideas. Well, you know, trust me, I'm in your shoes. I hear great ideas all the time, but actually, how do I implement these great ideas if I already have paid my teachers a certain way? So if you decide to do a grand reopening, it takes a lot of work. It's, you know, I would say 4 months with a coach kind of planning to see how you would do that. And it's a re-onboarding of your staff and maybe a shift of the schedule and like a representation to the community. And if you do choose to say that, do that, I would say be very, very, very clear on why you're doing it. And when you present this with the onboarding, the re-onboarding, or the new summit with your teachers, or the kickoff, or however you decide to phrase it, being very clear on why you're changing the schedule around and why you're changing the teacher compensation. Always coming back, of course, to your core values and not just, oh, we're going to move this around so it's more fair for people. And, you know, like being very, very clear on why you're changing that. But it's hard. It's hard. I will honor that for all of you who are watching this thinking, yeah, all these ideas sound great, but how do I tell my teachers that have been teaching with me for 8 years that I'm going to be teaching them differently? And also to the owners out there who don't just place teachers in different classes. I've talked to so many of my clients. It's really, really hard to find teachers right now. Not saying it's impossible, because nothing's impossible, but finding teachers, qualified teachers, teachers who are really experienced and fit in your core values and can teach in those classes you want them to teach. It's difficult. It's not easy. There's not just teachers that are knocking on doors right now that I see. So it can be done. It needs planning and it needs thought and it needs attention. So I just want to make sure I sit on the other side of the screen, because that's where I sat for many, many years, and honor that it's, you know, it's not easy, but it can be done with planning.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that changing the schedule and you pay your teachers and how you schedule your teachers, those are like the highest friction moves in most yoga studios. Like they're the things that someone will gripe about, where you like have to deal with a lot of different opinions and feelings on the whole situation. So it's not simple in the energetics of it, but it's relatively simple, I would suggest, as like just making the shift, but it requires you to have a system in place for it. So to Jennifer, to your point, because I totally agree, I think that going back to your core values and selling your team on a larger vision of what you're trying to do and accomplish, and then from that place, explaining why you're making a structural shift of any sort and getting them bought in on that, that's always the first thing that has to happen. And you need to budget real significant time and effort towards that. Like it should be that you're so thorough on that your team's like, yeah, like we get it in a perfect situation, because the specific what is way less important than the why in these cases, especially when we talk about team dynamics and having a positive internal culture. Also, when you do that, and Jennifer, you live this so well in your studio, when you go back to your core values and that bigger vision and why factor for what you're doing, it forces you to audit yourself. So like if you're making a structural shift in your pay, it forces you to just like kind of look in the mirror around the whole thing and be like, wait, why am I doing this? Like, what am I actually solving for? To Teresa's point earlier, sometimes people throw in oh, well, I'm going to make it a performance-based pay. And this has come up in the YC in discussion throughout the years a few times. I'm thinking about performance-based pay because I want my teachers to fill their classes, but that's like the wrong tool for that problem. It's not that it couldn't be part of the solution, but if the reason you're like switching pay structures because you think that that is going to suddenly make your team promote their classes and then your classes are suddenly going to be busy, that doesn't happen. That's not actually how that works. So when you go through this filtration system and Y factor and bigger vision and core values that Jennifer is referring to, it lets you gut check on that too. Like, oh, really what I want is people to come to the yoga classes. So what I need is marketing, advertising, retention, team training or whatever, not necessarily pay structure. Not that it couldn't also result in the pay structure change, but it lets you sort of check in on that. Last thought on this really quick is one of the things, Jennifer, that you're identifying for me too, is how much as a leader in your business to make the tough choices and harder shifts, a big part of it will come from your team believing that you have a system in place to produce a result. That sounds funny because it's separate from you, but if I don't think that like you're designing a machine and a system to produce this result for us to get like to live by our core values and get to our bigger vision and mission as in the studio, then the only thing left is it's just because you personally want it. And that's where you get this friction point of like, it's the owner versus the person when you're trying to make the shift. And that's the place that is the most difficult, because then you get a lot of weird, underhanded, passive aggressive commentary like, oh, well, you know, Jennifer just wants to get paid more. That's why, like, oh, it's just all about business at Jennifer's studio. We're just trying to make more money all the time. And it's like, one, yes, we are trying to make more money, but no, like there's more to it than that. Obviously, there's a bigger thing that's going on here. So I think that really thinking it through and like presenting it as a system and explaining the system rather than saying, I'm changing your pay, explain the system of the pay in this example, that's actually extremely empowering for people to get on board with it because they can see the bigger plan and picture. It creates a transparency of understanding around what the objective is and what you're trying to solve for.
Right. And I totally agree. I was going to bring up as well that, you know, it's true that it involves planning and you have to like an introspection and working with your coach to figure out what is the best structure to achieve your goals. And it doesn't have to be, I want to just like throw in there, it doesn't have to be that big a deal. It doesn't have to be scary and you don't have to get pushback. And it all comes down to that why and making sure that you have that really clear for yourself, your yoga brain and your business brain agree. And then when you bring it to your staff, you start with that. And always, and it's so easy to like get your staff on board because probably their personal why for being in your business is that they want to help people. Like, I would hope so, right? So you share that. And so if you can just explain how this will help you help more people, help them help more people, then they will be on board. So from our personal experience, having moved from, we just did flat rate like everybody else at the beginning, and we just paid, like, we're like, okay, what do the teachers in town make? Okay, we'll start you at that. And then we moved into a tiered performance-based pay scale with multiple metrics on it, like their participation and things like that. And like, I was kind of bracing myself and literally zero pushback to that. And then we moved from paying, you guys hear my son, he's chiming in. So flat rate on the tiered pay scale to hourly and zero pushback on that. So it's all about how you present it to them. And I'll also say too, like, you know, Jennifer was mentioning how it's different for a lot of studios now after the pandemic, that like, it's harder to find teachers. And also like, you don't have as much liberty to plug people in. For a lot of studios, that's always been the case. Like in our area, it was hard to find teachers and we didn't really have, you know, some teachers that we needed were only available on Thursdays. So that was their class on Thursdays, whether I liked it or not, because I wanted someone to teach on Thursdays, right? So, so it's not necessarily new to all studios. So definitely if that is something that's kind of a newer situation to you, talk with your coach about it, yes. and like post in the network and get some advice from your peers who have been there for years dealing with that. Teresa.
I wanted to circle back just a little bit, like backtrack all the way back to the beginning when we were talking about the mentality of your staff and the owner mentality about how staff are going to react to things. And my staff won't come to my staff meetings, and I can't, they want to raise and I can't tell them no because they might quit, and just making these assumptions and kind of running things from a place of fear. There's always the saying, whether you think you're right or wrong, you're going to be right? So if you think no one's going to come to the meetings, and so then you don't even schedule meetings, then you're not going to move forward. You're screwed. We've gone through so much, and I still see a lot of burnout with owners, and there are even owners that have the mindset where, when things shut down a little bit, when things slowed down a little bit, people got a break. And now people are tired and things are picking up and you have to work again, And so then also with your staff, a lot of things changed. You may have done this with your clients too, but especially with staff, we didn't require meetings as much during that time because everyone had all this stuff going on. And, so a lot of business owners slacked on a lot of requirements from their teachers. And now they're wanting to ramp things back up again. And so and when you have this negative attitude, going back to that for just a second, and you always are thinking, well, my instructors are not going to do this. If I make this change, they're not going to be on board. They're so used to doing this now that I can't change it to that. And so you're always starting from a place of failure and from a place of negativity. And so it's like impossible in your head how to change things and how to move forward. And so there may have to be some sort of shift, some sort of reordering. Jennifer mentioned a whole reopening and restructuring, but it could be that you haven't had meetings lately. And so now how do you make the shift that, okay, we're going to have meetings again. We're going to go back to the way that it was before again. And thinking about it not as you're running this business with a bunch of your friends, but you're running this business with staff. And thinking about it with that mentality. And then what do you need to do to shift things? So maybe it's like I mentioned, a reopening. Maybe it's that you're going to schedule an evaluation with all of your staff members and go through the expectations for each of them and have them sign their contracts again or revised contracts. Stuff needs to be, Josh put in their staff party. There needs to be some sort of shift, because if you're always approaching it from this negative attitude where they're not going to do what I say, they're not going to participate, then you feel like you're fighting against everything all the time, and there's no sense of ease, and that's exhausting. So then that's going to further contribute to burnout. So there needs to be some sort of shift. So it's kind of just sitting down and focusing on your business in this way, getting out of the day-to-day, and what shift can I make to start spinning things in a positive way. First thing's mindset. You can't say, oh, they're not going to participate in this way. You have to think, what can we do to make them participate in this way?
Yeah, collaborative instead of confrontational. Like, rather than looking at it as a fight, look at it as a collaboration, but you still have to be the lead. Someone has to be in front. What you're really triggering for me is this thing that happens, Teresa, that we've talked about a lot in here, that like there is this weird anti-business, anti-success, anti-money narrative that exists in the yoga world. And we bring it up. And at the surface level, it's a simple one for us to point at and look at, because it presents itself when teacher says, like, I don't believe in sales. and you're like, well, do you believe in a paycheck? Like that's the easy way to look at it. But on the owner level, here's the like real gut check thing that you have to get. This is why yoga business is your yoga practice as a yoga entrepreneur. You have to get very real around the fact that if you are finding yourself with scarcity and fear thoughts around things like asking your staff to participate in your business, something structurally and logically needs to be adjusted, and you have to figure out a collaborative way to approach that. But you also have to audit and realize like that's a core sort of belief system change that also has to happen, that like you deserve to ask them for their help. They opted into being a yoga teacher and doing this job, and they opted into working at your yoga studio, and you opened a yoga studio to help people and change their lives. So it is your responsibility to nurture and build that studio and do the right thing for it as a separate entity from you or any other individual person. So when you let that fear creep in and affect you doing the right thing because of the scarcity around enough teachers or someone quitting or someone not liking you or not liking the change that you make, it's really detrimental to the total impact potential that you can make for yourself, for your business, for your clients, for your profit, for all of it. And in my mind, that's the deeper set stuff that we don't realize in the yoga industry has been this continual narrative inserted into not everyone, but a lot of people's minds that you have to break free from. You have to like break out of that dogma, because you've got to really look at this whole thing cleanly. The detail of how do you get your team on board with it, to your point, is something to be solved. Absolutely. But the detail that you would need to solve, how do I get my team on board with this, does not supersede the fact that you need to get your team on board with the decision you've made to make your business better. I get fired up about this stuff. Oh, hence core values. Jennifer. All right, you guys. Final thoughts on this? Let's wrap it up.
You own a business. Run it like a business.
Barely. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to all of this too is like yoga business is fun. It's fun running a studio. It's fun having people that are like, it's a positive environment and you get to like drive that forward too. So this has been a conversation today around like, these are some high friction, bigger shift, interesting things to do. And they can elicit a nervous response, a little anxiety around it, but just realize like, that's okay. That's just because you care, but this stuff is fun. And when you start to get your whole team moving the same direction and feeling fairly compensated, and it works for the business, and the schedule is working so students are coming in, and all of these things start to come together, man, that's flow state in your business. Like, it's really fun. It's really enjoyable. So sometimes we got to step out of the weeds for a second and be like, no, wait, this is all good. And it's going to be really awesome when it's there as well.
Actually, I did just have one final comment to what you said way back at the beginning, Josh, is they're not your friends. Right. And I've been listening, remembered that when I bought and this, I think it's particularly when you buy a studio where you are teaching, that you are often friends with a lot of the instructors. And I had a very good friend, and we were definitely having some friction after I bought the studio. And it took me a while to realize this, and I thanked her later. But there was some friction because it was like really hard. She had the presence of mind to said she quit because she said, Terry, I'd rather keep you as a friend than just have you as a boss. And it was really hard to hear. And for months, we didn't speak or talk, and we used to talk all the time. And then finally, I started to realize that she was absolutely right. And we're still friends to this day. I just talked to her the other day. And so that can be a thing too, is that it's hard to hear that, and it can be a tough place to be in when you have to put on that boss hat, particularly if they are, I mean, this is like the person I would tell them, like, secrets to, right? Emotional stuff, that type of stuff. And she, like I said, she had the wherewithal to recognize this relationship as boss and employee is not going to work. So I just put that out there too, is that if that could be a potential, if you have someone who's a really good friend, and then all of a sudden you become their boss.
Yes, two sides of the same coin, because in the reverse, the people who are your employees, you can be friendly with them. You can be lightweight friends. It's not to say none of that can be there, but the idea of you're not their friend is the cleanliness of the relationship. And here's the absolute truth. For them to succeed, for them individually to be the best, most impactful, highest power yoga teacher within your organization, they don't need you to be their friend. They need you to be their leader. It's a different thing. Okay. Whew. Well, a little bit of rabbit hole today. I like it. Good stuff. Post in the comments down below. We haven't done this for a while. If you watch this after the fact, leave us a comment down below. What is your current pay structure strategy? And here's the specific question. Is it aligned with the way that you schedule your team? Are those two things or is it, did you not think about it that way? Or do you feel like it's off? Or what's the relationship between I pay them this way and we schedule them this way, and here's the relationship between the two? Make some sort of a comment around that. That's what I'm curious to hear from you guys about. We do check. We will make videos on it after the fact. Other than that, have a great Friday and have a great weekend.
And
keep saving some lives.
And if you're not working with a coach currently and you'd like to talk about pay structure and all this stuff, any of us coaches here, book a call with us and we'd be happy to talk about pay structure.
Mhm.
You'll get it custom dialed in for your unique studio situation, style, experience you're offering, and make sure that it's right. So it's going to work for the business, you and them, 100%. All right. What is it, Kay?
Go do some yoga.
There we go.